Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode. There are certain cameras that just feel right, and when you find one that feels right for you, it's likely to inspire and improve your photography. Today, I'm going to show you 4 cameras that have inspired me and I hope have helped to improve the kind of images that I make. Better gear won't necessarily make you a better photographer, but a camera that you can bond with, a camera that you like and feel an affinity with, can. So the first camera I'm going to look at today is this old workhorse. I'm probably being a bit unjust to it actually. This was my first proper camera. This is the Fed 4, or to be absolutely technically correct, I think it's the Fed 4B. And this is the actual camera that I got for Christmas all those years ago in 1977. I'd had a Polaroid camera before that, a Polaroid colour swinger that took the old 88 pack film, and I used that for a year, but I wasn't terribly happy with it, and it became clear over the course of that year that it was really just a snapshot camera, although a very innovative one. So enter the Fed 4. When I saw this camera, I knew this was the one for me. What I saw when I saw this camera was precision. This is a precision engineered tool, and that is what attracted me to it. I didn't know that it was about 20 odd years out of date at the time. I didn't know that it was one of the less desirable cameras available at that time, but I did know a fully featured camera when I saw it. So let's have a closer look at this remarkable rangefinder from the former Soviet Union, the Fed 4. So this is indeed a fully featured camera. It's a manual camera, but it's no worse for that. So we've got shutter speeds on the top here from 1 second to 1/500th of a second plus B. The B setting actually doesn't work on this camera anymore. It hasn't worked for a number of years, and it gives a setting of only 1 setting, but that's not too bad for over 40 years of service. We've got a nice lever wind on the right hand side here. We've got a lens. This is the Industar 61 lens. It actually needs a bit of lubrication, this one. It's really gone the way of a lot of old lenses and become very sticky, but I'll be able to free that up easily. The lens has apertures from f2.8 all the way over to f16, and this camera has a built-in light meter, and actually that's a really useful piece of kit. It saves all the fiddling about with separate light meters and transferring readings from the light meter to the camera, and it really does save a lot of bother. I was given this camera in 1977 and I used it all the way up until late 80s, early 90s sometime. This was my only camera for all that time. Not only was it my only camera, but this little lens was actually my only lens, and so those were the constraints I was working within. And in fact, this camera as a manual rangefinder does give you lots of constraints. This is not as flexible a camera as, say, a film SLR. And working within constraints promotes creativity, it promotes originality of technique, it promotes problem solving, and it encourages you to find ways around things and find ways to do things that you might not previously have considered. So I think it's very important, or it can be important, to work within constraints to liberate your creative approach. This is essentially 1930s technology, and I was using this from the late 70s up till the 90s, so I really did have to think around a few problems. This camera doesn't go very close, which is inherent in all rangefinders. They are not generally made in order to have very close focusing abilities like SLRs do. So what I had to do was close the aperture down as much as I could, maybe to f8 or even to f11 if the light was enough, and get a little extra depth of field that way so I could get a little bit closer. So facing problems like that and finding solutions to them, I really do think helped to improve my photographic technique. My first steps with this camera were pretty conventional actually, for the most part posed family shots, but I began to experiment. I felt a little bit limited by that sort of genre, if we can call it a genre, and I became interested by more casual, more candid shots and portraits. So I began to take candid shots of the family. They weren't always welcomed as they were considered not to be proper photographs, and I guess I was going outside those traditional family photograph limits a little bit, but I did try and push the boundaries as far as I could with this camera. I missed a close focus ability. I did begin to miss that, only ever being able to get to within 3 feet or 1 meter or so. But I did use this for, 10, 12 years. I still really like it actually, and I do occasionally pull it down from the shelf, stick a film in it and shoot it. It's just a nice camera. It's a capable camera. It is what it is and it can do what it can do, but I think certainly working within its constraints helped me in those early days to develop my photographic technique. I think it's worth trying a camera like this, especially if you've been a digital shooter and you're used to DSLRs or mirrorless, and those are the main kinds of camera that you've used. It really is worth trying a very simple manual rangefinder like this, just to see how it affects your technique, just to see whether it takes you places you wouldn't otherwise have gone. And it's very easy to do that as well. These are not expensive cameras. You can find a good one of these with an Industar 61 lens like this one for around about £20, sometimes cheaper than that. They occasionally go for 15. I've even seen them go for £10, so there really is no excuse not to try one. A lovely little camera, and I'm glad I still have it with me. Now, from a camera with lots and lots of constraints to one that has, by comparison, almost none, it's this one, the Sony A7, and this is my most used camera. I think the shutter count, I checked it the other day and was rather shocked to find it's almost at 60,000. I've used it and used it and used it. I've shot thousands and thousands of images for lenses that I've been reviewing on the channel, and I've shot thousands more just for my own enjoyment. It's the camera probably that's inspired me the most of all cameras that I've used and enjoyed. This camera is a full frame sensor camera, and because of that it shoots vintage lenses as they were designed to be shot. So you can shoot all those old lenses from the film days on this camera and they'll behave just as they did on that film camera. And the only difference is, of course, you can shoot this one, unlike an SLR, pretty much any time, anywhere, in pretty much any light as well. It's a very, very, very flexible, very powerful camera. There is no crop factor on any of the images. All of the character of the lens is preserved. Now, when I got this camera, I only actually had 2 vintage lenses. They were an old Jupiter 8 that I still have somewhere and a Helios 40, but despite that I just couldn't wait to shoot them. I bought this camera pretty much solely for the purpose of shooting vintage lenses on it, and to this day I've hardly shot the kit lens that came with it. It's a 28 to 70 35 to 5.6. It's not a fantastic lens, but it's a reasonable kit lens. I'd be surprised if it's got more than 100 shots on it. That's how little I've used it, and that's how much I've used this camera for vintage lenses. And yeah, I found this camera very inspiring. It inspired me to pick up those old lenses again. It inspired me to do a completely different way of digital photography than I had been doing, that is using vintage lenses on a full frame sensor camera. And in fact, it eventually inspired me to begin this channel. So this is a camera that really has given me a lot. Let's have a look at its unique selling point, its famous party trick, and that is its full frame sensor. And there is that wonderful technical achievement, the Sony full frame sensor. This is a 24 megapixel sensor, which is fairly low resolution these days. It's certainly not headline grabbing, and it wasn't the maximum resolution of a Sony camera when it was new. There was the A7R that had 36 megapixels, but I really couldn't see myself needing those. It's quite a simple camera in layout, quite conventional. It's got the conventional PASM dial at the top here, shutter speed button here, exposure comp dial here, which is very useful, and you can turn that just with the side of your thumb as you're looking through the camera. There's a control wheel there and a control wheel here. So it's a fairly conventional camera in terms of layout. It's a very small camera as well. I don't know if that is coming through clearly, but it really is very, very tiny. It's quite slim, it's not particularly tall, and it's a real technical tour de force fitting that enormous sensor into this very small body. It's held up very, very well. I've given it a great deal of use, and I really haven't spared it. It's clearly a very high quality machine and very, very nicely put together. The only fault that has developed over all that time is a very, very tiny one, which I'll show you, which is that, let's have some focus, thank you, which is that this small piece of rubber here has just come unglued from the body, so it just needs to be glued back on there, and I'll do that before very long. But that's pretty good for all those years and for all that service, and this camera has held up really, really well. So you're okay to buy one of these used. You know that if you're going to buy one of these used, it is a well-made machine, it is very hardy and very reliable, and you're likely to be able to find a good one without too much difficulty. The cost for one of these cameras, well, you can find a good one certainly for £500, possibly 400. You might even be able to find some new ones. There are probably some new ones still around somewhere. They're likely to go for around £600. But if you want a camera that will shoot vintage lenses just as they were designed without losing any of their character, this is one of the cheapest, possibly the cheapest full frame camera you can buy at the moment, and it's well worth using one, seeking one out and buying one if you would like to do that. There really is no better place to start. The next camera we're going to look at is two cameras. Well, actually it's two versions of the same camera. It's the OM2, the Olympus OM2, and because it's so similar, the OM2 SP. I'm going to have to put one down though, because I can't hold two of them and talk to you at the same time. My skills have not been developed to that extent. So here's this lovely little OM2. Now, I've been aware of these cameras since the late 70s when I happened to discover them on reading Amateur Photographer magazine. And at that time they were very exotic and unreachable things. I was using my Fed 4 and this seemed like a camera that was made in heaven and accessible only to angels and other divine beings. However, I'm glad to say that's not the case anymore, and I have bought quite a few, well, one or two anyway, of these Olympus cameras just because they're so beautiful and because I appreciate their design so very much. They're very, very small cameras. This is really small camera. It fits very easily into my hand. It's very easy to hold. You can hold it with the left hand like this. It's really tiny, and I've done comparisons with these cameras and the old Barnack Leicas, and actually there's not much in it. These are, broadly speaking, the same size. The hump adds a bit of a top. The prism hump adds a bit of height to the top, but broadly speaking, they're the same size as the old Leicas. So they're very, very tiny cameras, and they're beautifully made. There's a real attention to detail and a very innovative design on these cameras. Let's just have a brief look at this one. So there's the OM2, and it's a really simple camera to work. It's got automatic exposure plus manual, so if you want auto, move the switch over to auto from the off position and you're ready to go. Nice lever wind, nice slick easy mechanism, nice shutter sound, well, actually quite a loud shutter sound, which is something of a hallmark of the SLR type camera. There's an exposure compensation dial up top here. Shutter speeds are altered and set using the ring that's concentric with the lens mount here. That's if you're shooting manual. And all in all, it's a very, very beautiful little thing. One weakness that they have is this hot shoe. It's a screw-on hot shoe and it's made of plastic, and of course they break. They weren't really up to the job when they were new, and they're certainly not up to the job now. This one came with the very, very rare hot shoe plastic cover, so that's a nice rare thing. The Olympus Olympus OM2 SP dispenses with that weakness. It's got a built-in hot shoe. Focus please. Thank you. It's got a built-in hot shoe, so there's no danger of any problems developing there. The SP is slightly different. SP stands for Spot Program, and there are a lot more electronics used in this camera. It has a program mode as well as auto. There's auto. There's program, in which it does everything for you. Auto is aperture priority, and then we've got a manual / spot setting down the bottom there. So there is a spot exposure setting on these as well. The exposure system was said to be better than that in the OM2, the plain OM2, but I'm not sure that's the case. It certainly works well enough. I've not had any problems with either. The SP is a bit of a more modern camera. It's got lots more electronics, and there is an issue where the batteries will run out if you don't leave it set to B. So I always leave my camera set to B, and in storage the batteries don't run out, so that's a good thing. They're just generally very, very lovely little things, and that goes to the lenses as well. Those Zuiko lenses are just delightful. They are optically beautiful, they are mechanically beautiful, and they're really good looking too. I love the way that Olympus have used colours on the lens here. They're also very small. This is a 50mm 1.8 and fully retracted. That's a very, very small lens, not quite a pancake, but not far off. And the Zuiko lenses do tend to be pretty small. These cameras inspired me to start shooting film again after a considerable break of about 10 years. And of course to make up for lost time in the 70s when I wasn't able to buy one. I do love the Nikon FE and the FM. Those are lovely cameras, but I don't know, they're a little bit meat and too veg compared to these. There's nothing wrong with them, and I'm certainly not trying to degrade or talk down the Nikon cameras. I like using them very much every time I take them out, but when you come to them from one of these, my gosh, they do feel very, very conventional, very stolid and rather ordinary. These have such finesse, they have such beauty, they're just inspiring to hold in the hands. I think the OM2 and the 2SP might just be the sweet spot of the Olympus line. The OM1 is a very, very fine camera, absolutely beautiful camera, but it doesn't have that aperture priority auto exposure, which can be really useful and really nice to have when you want them. The OM3 is profoundly expensive these days because not many of them were made, and the OM4 does tend to be that bit more expensive, and I'm not sure it's any better a camera than the 2 or the 2SP. If you'd like to try one, these are great cameras for rekindling a love of film because they're such beautiful machines to use. And if you want to buy one, you can find them for between £100 and £150 with a lens, probably a 1.8. They are available for less than that. I bought this 2SP plus 2 lenses, this 51.8 and a 53.5 macro, and a little Olympus Trip point and shoot for £100. So the bargains are there. Look for badly photographed, badly described kit and you stand a greater chance of bagging a bargain. There is no better camera for inspiring a return to film. Try one and I don't think you'll be disappointed. Next we have a camera that right from the start I felt right at home with. Something just feels right about this camera. It's the Fujifilm XT1, and I've rarely found a more inspiring camera. These Fujifilm X cameras take a very different approach to digital photography than most manufacturers do. This is designed to be a similar experience to shooting a film camera, and I think that they succeed fantastically well at doing that. These cameras have innovative and original designs, and they have to some extent reinvented how we do digital photography. We've got some dials on the top plate here, and that reduces significantly the amount of menu diving that one has to do, which is a big contrast to many digital cameras, especially the more consumer focused models. It has inbuilt film simulations which reproduce the look of Fujifilms of the past. Actual Fujifilm stocks have been used to model these simulations on, so these are authentic simulations. And what this camera did really was refresh my approach to digital photography. It inspired me to take a different approach because it's a different way of digital shooting. The controls are different, for one thing. Let me show you a little more closely. So you can see that instead of the conventional PASM dials, we've got 3 main dials on the top of the camera. One's for exposure compensation, that's a very handy thing to have. You can move that with the side of your thumb when you've got the camera to your eye. We've got a shutter speed dial here that mimics pretty much exactly the way the old film cameras were laid out. And right at the other end we've got a film speed or ISO dial, and those dials, more than anything else, make this a very different photography experience. So the controls are different, but more importantly, the experience of using this camera is different. It's not a film camera, but it's more in tune with the feel of film, with the approach of film. Anybody who's shot a film SLR in the past or a rangefinder will immediately feel comfortable and at home with one of these. It makes great images with less of an electronic, more of an organic feel. You know, sometimes digital images can be a little harsh. They can seem a little, well, digital, electronic are the words that spring to mind. These images are much more rounded, much softer, much warmer, much more inviting for the most part. The colours are film-like, and it's just an entirely different experience to shooting a conventional digital camera. The X cameras are something fresh in a world of convention and sameness and conformity and PASM dials. This camera makes me want to go out and shoot it, and if you're talking about inspiration, you really can't get much more inspirational than that. A lovely little camera, and one that I recommend you to try if you at all can. They're actually very cheap now. You can get one of these, a good one, for between £250 and £300. 300 will buy you an absolute minter. Beautiful little machine, and inspired me to look at digital photography in a totally different way. So there we are. That's it from me for today. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that bell before you go. And if you like the content on this channel and you'd like to help support it and help it grow and develop, you can do that at patreon.com/Zenography. As ever, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zenography.